All right, the one and only Akira the Don. I appreciate
Yo,
you coming on.
yo. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Again, appreciate you coming on. As I mentioned before, big
Yeah, man.
fan myself. So really excited about the convo and where this may go. But I want to start it with what you got coming up this week. This episode will be released in like 2 weeks, but as of recording this on Friday, you're releasing your new album. So what made you go down the route that you did with this current album? The person is Earl Nightingale, that is kind of the
Mm.
featured voice. And so why him? Why now?
Well, he's been on my list. I have a big list, you know. He's been on my list for a long time. So this could have happened at any point in, I don't know, for years. It's been years. When did I first? And I contacted his estate years, maybe 3-4 years ago. But I didn't hear anything back. It was one of those ones where like the website email bounces and you try another one and da. And, you know, I didn't want to be doing it without permission. So I tried to contact them years ago, didn't get in touch. So then it just was on the things to do, you know. Then I tried again this year because the way I work is there's always a kind of central theme around which different voices are observing or discussing or what have you. It's not always obvious that that's going on to everybody, but that is what's going on. And what Earl spoke a lot about was the power one possesses via the control of one's mind, which is something that Marcus Aurelius talks about a lot, for example. And we just had that Marcus Aurelius album, and he talks a lot about that. That's one of the things that you have. You know, the whole Stoic idea of some things are in our control and others not, you know, and how most unnecessary suffering comes as a result of people dwelling on things outside of their control. What's in our control is our thoughts. That is something we can actually control. And our thoughts are more powerful than we realize, you know. So anyway, Earl Nightingale talks about the power of thought and what can be achieved via thought and the control, regulation of thought and so on and so forth. And he talks about it in a very beautiful and specific and useful fashion, almost kind of like a how-to guide type way, right? And I often do this. So I'll have one person might be talking about the philosophical aspect of the thing. Someone else will be talking about the practical application. Earl Nightingale is a practical application guy. And he has a very beautiful, very sonorous, very rich and powerful voice that really lends itself very well to what I do. So yeah, I've been wanting to work with his voice for a long time, but I was finally able to get in touch with his estate and get the permission recently. And it fits in with everything else that's going on in Meaningwave right now.
Yeah, just so people who don't quite know, before we get a little deeper, how would you explain the type of music that you put out, and what is Meaningwave?
Well, one way of thinking about it, I guess, is Meaningwave is a audio psychotechnology with the aim of integrating ideas and knowledge, wisdom, things of that nature via the most powerful delivery mechanism that we have, which is music, which people don't think of a lot as being that. People think of music as like, oh, I'll put this on to relax or something. Maybe sometimes people will have it for a purpose, right? They'll be like, I want to get hyped up for the gym, or I want to have something on that I can study to. So people have a vague idea that music has a sort of a way of affecting them. But, you know, music is very, very, one of the things it's very, very good at is delivering information into the person, and particularly into the subconscious where, you know, most things happen.
Yeah, it's a brilliant idea because, like, I think everybody can just understand that, you know, anything from 6th grade, I probably can't remember, but you tell me to, you know, sing a song, or a song comes up from 6th grade, and I remember every single lyric to the song without
A,
even
B, C,
having
D,
heard
E,
it for
F, G.
years.
Yeah, that's right. How do we lose it? How do we learn our ABCs? If you add melody and rhythm to something, we can way easier remember it. Certainly we know that much. But also it's true that there is melody and rhythm in all speech anyway. So part of what I do is just find that which is there and kind of eke that out and make it more obvious. by combining it with music and rhythm to sort of enhance what already exists. So that's a lot of what I'm doing. So it's not like, sometimes you hear people take some speech and they'll kind of auto-tune it or something, right? And it'll be a funny meme type song or something. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is finding the melody and rhythm that's inherent and making that more obvious.
So you start with somebody's voice and then create melody, rhythm, and just sound to it rather than, you create a sound and then find somebody's voice to match it.
I know sometimes it's both. Sometimes I'll have a piece of music and I can recognize that the speech will fit this music. And sometimes I have the speech and I build the music around it. And sometimes, like with the Marcus Aurelius stuff, it's just words and I'm vocalizing. So then, it works differently in that manner as well. So, there are many ways of approaching it and doing it. But the most important thing is that the ideas are brought forth in their most pure and true form and useful form. Because the whole thing must be useful.
Mm-hmm. Then with Earl, you said a lot of his stuff is very applicable, practical for the everyday person. Which
is the same with Marcus Aurelius. It's the same with a lot of people, these people I'm working with. But some are more obvious than others in that regard.
What is one or two ideas, practical tips that is going to be on this album that you really want somebody to take away from?
Well, it's very simple. It's pretty simple. It's very simple. I guess the most important thing is to be aware that you are in control of your thoughts, and that thoughts become things. Life works from the inside out, right? And you become what you think about, right? So if you're thinking, and very, very, very simply, if you're just thinking of negative, miserable things all day long, you will find that your life becomes that way. And if you think the inverse, you will find that your life becomes the inverse. This is very, very simple, but it's very, very true. And you do get to decide. You do get to decide if you're going to be happy or miserable. You do decide if you're going to see things negatively or positively. You do get to decide if you're thinking of things in terms of lack, limitation, or abundance, right? I personally have this filter that I use for decision making, where if I'm making a decision, I'll think, all right, am I making this decision based on lack or abundance, right? Am I thinking this from a sort of closed in, oh, there's only so much resource and what if this happens, or the inverse, right? So I make decisions based on abundance, and that always works a lot better. So similarly, if one is paying attention to one's thoughts and one's interior monologue and so on and so forth, and one keeps it in check to be positive, you will end up with positive results and a positive outcome and a positive life. Very, very simple.
So is that decision-making framework that you just explained, is that like a very conscious thing you do, that you're, you have a decision right in front of you and you literally ask yourself that?
Yeah. I have various heuristics for all sorts of things I do. It makes it a lot easier, right? So if I have a decision, it's like, okay, should I do this or that? If this thing is a lack option and this is an abundance option, I'll go with the abundance one. And that's worked out better for me over time. I've worked out.
And how long has this been something that has been like forefront of your mind, whether just philosophy in general or self-improvement, whatever you want to call it, of just like being very conscious about your thoughts, about what you're listening to, and just something that is, again, just very prevalent within your own life?
Some things have always been there and some things in an inexplicit fashion. But for example, I only discovered the concept of self-talk, internal monologue, and the fact that I had control over it about 10 years ago when I read Mike Cernovich's Gorilla Mindset book, where he spoke about the concept of self-talk. I wasn't even aware that there was a word for it. And he pointed out that most people's the way they spoke to themselves, you wouldn't even speak to somebody you hated that badly. And I realized that was very much the case with myself. I spoke to myself awfully. There was an exercise he suggested in it, which is you should just sort of speak into the mirror that which is in your mind. And then if you practice that regularly, you'll start to see how fucking ridiculous it is. And I did that for a while. I was like, gotcha. And then, then I started paying attention to what was happening in there. And then I started, then I came to the realization that that wasn't actually me, right? How much of it was actually just stuff from my childhood, things that other people had said to me, echoes of things from parents or people or what have you, right? And then you start to realize, oh, you're not your thoughts, you're that which observes your thoughts, right? And then you realize that's the case with your emotions as well, and reactions and things of that nature. And then I started practicing sort of separating the awareness from all of that. And then I found that to be very helpful. I have some sort of practical ways of doing it. I do this thing, this like Vulcan thing, which I trained myself to do when I was in New York in 2004, making my first album. And I would walk around and I would just sort of flex that. And what I realized doing that was reconnecting me to my physicality, right? And it would remind me of myself. And when I would get in situations of, like I mentioned earlier, right, a lot of unnecessary suffering is as a result of being outside of the immediate moment. That's anxiety, right? That's worrying about things that might happen or what people are thinking or whatever it is, right? Any kind of worry. Or when people sit there sort of dreaming of this perfect past that never really existed and getting sad about that. All those things are not being in the moment. So doing this exercise will tether me to the moment and remind me of certain fundamental things. And one of those fundamental things is that I am not my thoughts or reactions. I am that which observes those. And then that can be a lot more useful in the world.
I love that. The Vulcan thing.
It's a little simple thing. People have different breathing exercises. People do breathing exercises to achieve the same point. There's lots of things people do. The thing I developed myself without realizing initially that's what I was doing was that.
Yeah, bringing you back to the present
anything
moment.
Yeah, exactly. Anything you can come up with to do that. It's a bit like the way that I was teaching my son how to lucid dream, and one of the ways you do that is to be aware that you're dreaming, to have some way of knowing that you're in a dream. And which is what this is, right? It's reminding yourself of the dream that you're in.
How does somebody remind themselves in a dream that they're dreaming?
Oh, it's a similar thing. You go, okay, you do something that you couldn't do in real life. You go, okay. So my thing will be to twist this all the way around. I'll just go, boop. So if this bends, oh yeah, I'm in a dream. If in real life I can go this far, right? But if I do this and it flops all the way over, then I must be in a dream. And if I must be in a dream, then that means that laws do not apply, and I can do whatever I want. So then I can do my flying stuff, and things of that nature.
And so, what's the goal of lucid dreaming? Like, why are you teaching your son to do that?
Well, I mean, we haven't really gone into. He was just asking.
Yeah.
He wanted to. He wanted to be able to control his nightmares. He's having nightmares, And when I was his age, I was having these nightmares. And in my nightmares, well, I was a bit younger than him actually, but my whole family was being stalked by something that looked like what I imagined Gollum to look like. I used to read those Lord of the Rings and Hobbit books, and the way I imagined Gollum was a lot more dark and terrifying than what was in the movies. This is why one of the reasons I didn't watch the Dune movie, because I didn't want what I imagined from reading the books to be replaced by the movie, and that's what happened with Lord of the Rings. But anyway, I used to have this sequence of nightmares, and this thing that looked like how I imagined Gollum to look was hunting me and my family in the woods. And one by one, he would pick them all off and kill them all. And I just kept having this dream over and over and over that this thing was hunting and killing my family. And eventually, I had to realize in the dream that, one, I was in a dream, and two, the only way I was going to stop it was by taking preemptive action and going after this creature first and stopping him before he could kill my family. So I did that. And then when I did that, those dreams stopped. And my son was having some nightmares, so I was trying to teach him to be able to take control of the dream within the dream to fix the issue that was causing it to keep recurring, so that then, he would stop having those nightmares.
Have you ever? I haven't, so I don't know anything about this, but maybe you do. Have you ever looked into? I forget if it's Freud or Jung or whoever it may be, about just like what our dreams may represent, why we have the dreams and nightmares that we have, and what that is trying to subconsciously tell us.
I mean, there's lots of schools of thought on this, and there are conflicting ideas of what these things represent, right? Jung has his ideas, Freud has his ideas. I would pick Jung over Freud if it was one of those, like, you need to pick one type things. But I think we can usually work these things out ourselves. Yeah. It's pretty, you can say something like, my family all being hunted down and murdered. That could be to do with some anxiety of, losing one's family, not having any control over the fact that you could lose your family, and that there are things within the family that are outside of your control, that there are issues within the family. But actually, I had Peterson talk about this in one of the songs I made, with regards to some kids' nightmares about there being a dragon and the dragon in the house, and the dragon representing like the problems that were happening within the house, and the problems with the family, and so on and so forth. And certainly when I was young, my parents were fighting a lot and eventually divorced, and so on and so forth. And that was completely outside of my control, right? But I mean, it doesn't necessarily immediately matter if one has practical ways of resolving the issue. See, as you're saying, there are things outside of your control, right? But so you can't do anything about the things outside of your control. You can't fix your parents' relationship, for example. But if you're having nightmares about it, you can fix that. You can fix how you think and react and deal with things. Right? I was talking to my wife about this. She was sad. There were some problems. There's always problems. It's like, oh, these problems, are the problems ever going to stop? It's like, no, there'll always be more ones. And things won't get easier. She was like, will they ever get easier? It's like, no, it won't get easier. It will get harder. It will actually get harder. It will get harder and worse. And you'll get older and sicker, and people around you, everyone that you love will die. And it'll get worse and worse. And there's nothing you can do about that. But what can change is your capacity to deal with what life throws at you, right? You can make yourself stronger. You can make yourself more resilient. You can work on your mind. You can turn yourself into a person who can deal with whatever life throws at you. And that's what you can do. And that's what you must do. Otherwise, you will collapse in the face of the horrors of life.
Wise words. And so you said it was like 10 years ago or so when you first realized or just came across the idea of self-talk and being able to control your thoughts and things like that. What was your life like before that? Were you very in your head and was that like stopping you from creating things that you wanted to create? Did you feel stuck, lost? I don't know, just where were you at before that point?
Well, I mean, I was a lot more ruled by my emotions, I was definitely ruled a lot more by my emotions, and I was very, very harsh on myself and very self-critical, and that would manifest in various things in my life, Now, and it's worth bearing in mind, there's this meme these days of how you shouldn't be harsh to yourself, and you should this or that and the other. And it's gone too far in the other direction now because, it's perfectly fine for you to be, a fat slob or whatever it is. It's like,
Body positivity. And
yeah. You do need to be whipping your own ass because no one else is going to do that for you. But like, just being a dick about it isn't helpful. You know what I mean? So, yeah. And as far as like how things manifested with not having that stuff under control, things were very chaotic. I had problems with sort of money, and I wasn't as focused as I needed to be. I would kind of move from one project to another, and just on kind of whim basis, just like, oh, now I'll do this, now I'll do that, which is fine. And that sort of thing is fine when you're young and you don't have responsibilities, right? You can get away with that. And it's actually could be good to do that. You can experiment, you can try all these different things, right? But, if you have a family, if you have dependents and what have you, then you need to be, doing what you need to do to look after these people. And, there is less room for chaos, Chaos is cool when you're young and you're making your way in the world and you're exploring things. And perhaps chaos is okay when you're old and it doesn't matter anymore and you've done your thing. But in the middle, you got to get shit done.
Yeah, the chaos bell curve. The two ends of it, you gotta,
right.
You're good to go. But
Exactly.
the midwit of the chaos, you gotta be a little more structured, more reliable, and be there for the people that need you.
There's a time for psychedelic drugs. There is a time for having a bottle of liquid acid, and I think that time is for the young and the old. So yeah.
That might be maybe the wisest thing I've heard on this podcast yet. The bell curve of chaos. I love it.
Bell curve of bottle of liquid acid.
um, then when you got into just the meaning wave in general, what was the first spur or first moment that made you take that leap into, as far as I'm concerned, or just as far as I'm aware, a very unique style of music, of artistry that I haven't really seen much elsewhere. And so I don't know if you created the genre, but you're one of the pioneers of it for sure. What was that like, just trusting yourself?
I always did. And it was something I'd been working on since I first started making music. And the basic idea was, okay, you have, on albums, you would have, say, skits, right? Which would be like a little 20-second thing at the beginning of a
Mm-hmm.
song. Or like, say, and a lot of rap albums would do this, but also at the time, the music I was listening to at the time, Manic Street Preachers, who are a rock group from Wales, did it. Morrissey did it. He'd be like sampling bits of old movies or interviews or what have you, and having that at the beginning of, or the end of a song to kind of add depth, add story, whatever it was, right? And my thing was like, well, what if that was the whole song? So what if rather than just being a tiny piece of a song, it was the whole song? So I used to make these mixtapes, and I'd be rapping, and but then I'd have a rap song, and then I'd have a whole song that was Jack Kirby talking about how he got the idea for Galactus from reading the Bible, and that would be a whole song. I would take the interview and I'd kind of chop it up a bit and sort of like time it over the beat so it sounded cool. And I wasn't aware of anyone else doing that at all. But I didn't think about that as it's what I wanted as part of the tapestry of the mixtapes I was making. So I always did that. When I was first making music with experiments with cassettes when I was like 7 years old, I'd be like with one of those cassette recorders, there'd be like a big bulky thing you hold in your hand, that you could record sound from onto the cassette. I'd be recording bits of like the TV in a school lesson. They used to wheel in these TVs, right, on like a wheel in a
Yep.
TV because you couldn't be asked teaching that day, and they just put fucking newsreels on or whatever it was. And I used to record bits of those and then dub that over the loops that I was putting together in these music experiments I was making at the time. So this is basically goes back to when I first started making music. And then I quit school when I was 16, but the last stuff I did for the exams, I just recorded my revision notes over ambient music and played it when I went to sleep. And that was the revision I did. So all these things together, I knew that music was a way of imbuing stuff you wanted to learn or remember. And I'd been experimenting with chopping up sampled vocal stuff and making that the thing. I'd always been doing that. So anyway, into around 2017, I'd been working on a bunch of instrumental music, and I'd stopped rapping because I didn't think I was smart or wise enough to make the album I wanted to make yet. And I didn't like when rappers spoke from a position of inauthenticity. I could tell, right? So I was in this period where it was like, right, I need to go have a kid. I need to learn a bunch of stuff before I can continue talking. And then I thought to myself, well, hang on, there's these people who've been thinking about these ideas that I'm interested in and are experts on these things. I could be using them, like in those experiments I was doing before. So I made a bunch of songs one week, and one of them had Jordan Peterson talking about about hierarchies and the utility of being an excellent plumber. And I had these 3 songs and I put them out, and now people really liked that one. And I'd heard James Altucher on a podcast say you should quadruple down on what works. So I was like, right, I'm just going to go in on this thing. This is one of these many things that I've invented over the years and have been developing over the years of all these various things. So let's just go in on one thing and just go all in and see what happens. So that's what I did, and now here we are.
Dang, that's fascinating. So you did that when you were 7, you said?
Mm-hmm.
The first kind of recordings?
The first experiments in that stuff was when I was 7, and that's basically as early as I remember. My first memories, I think, it's late 6 or something. And I liked comics and I liked music, and that's what I used to make these tapes and mixtapes, and I would sell them in school, and I would make these comics and I would sell them in school.
So music was always like the option for you.
It was always like music and comics, and that kind of aesthetic. I loved anime from when I discovered that. When I used to love American comic books. I was in hospital when I was 7, and my dad got me these American comic books, and I really loved that aesthetic. And I loved to draw, and I loved music. And so the combination of all those things was what I was always into. I used to make my own comics, and I would review music in the back of them. And In my very early, when I first started making my own music, it would always have like a comic book attached to it, or like some kind of animated visual thing or something. You know? So that
What were some of the first or American comics that you enjoyed?
Well, I mean, because I always loved comics. So I used to love Asterix. I used to love those Asterix comics, which were French. But then my dad got me these American comics when I was in hospital when I was 7, like a pile of them. And they were Todd McFarlane's Amazing Spider-Man run when Venom first appeared. I don't know if you know about any of that type of stuff, but there was this period in the like late 80s where comics were changing quite radically and art started getting more bombastic and ridiculous. And you have people like Todd McFarlane and Rob Liefeld and all these people coming along. And, so it was like American superhero comics, but I also really liked the sort of underground sci-fi type stuff, and the anime stuff. So I very quickly kind of developed, I really liked all the dystopian sci-fi type stuff. So I very quickly developed a kind of love of dystopian sci-fi anime, American comics, and Japanese comics. Like my favorite comic when I was like 8 was a British comic called Death's Head about a robot bounty hunter. Yeah.
And so you'd say those had a big influence on the music that you create?
Yeah, and also the philosophy, I think. They're all very philosophical. A lot of those kind of sort of dystopian sci-fi type comics were very philosophical, and they would be considered, because the idea was always, oh, what happens if more of this happens? Mm-hmm. You go down this rabbit hole, and what if this kind of level of sort of expression or corruption or what have you continues? And there's a lot of quite sort of deep ideas in those books and in those stories. And I always loved reading anyway. I used to read a lot of books. When recently Cat Williams was on that podcast talking about how many books he used to read and people were taking the piss out of him, I thought that I was not taking the piss out of him, because I too used to read like that. And it's not that difficult. And if you're I used to be in like 3 different libraries, and if you go into these different libraries every week and you're picking up a pile of books and you're sitting up under your bed with a little torch reading till 5 a.m, you can read a lot of fucking books. You ain't got shit else to do. We didn't have a TV. You know what I mean? Like,
how many books do you think you read?
I don't know, about like the amount he was talking about. Like, you could definitely read a book in a day, in a night, right? And you could read multiple. And if you're reading multiple books at the same time, and kids' books are often shorter anyway. Like, young. What was his name? Nicholas Fisk, I think it was. He used to write these sci-fi books I used to read, and they were all quite short. So you could read a lot of books pretty quickly. So I definitely read a lot of fucking books. And I think Cat Williams, the amount of books he says he read, I don't think that's actually out of the realms of possibility at all. So if you're sitting up till 5 a.m. every night reading a new book, you're definitely clearing at least like 7 books a week, but probably more than that because you're reading in the daytime as well. So you can read a lot of books. And also, like I said, a lot of these books are quite short. So, but then some of them are long. I read Lord of the Rings like when I was like 7 again, I think. 7, maybe earlier. Yeah. And that was a big book.
Yeah. How long would a book like that take you to read?
I don't know, maybe a week. I don't know.
Dang, that's pretty fast.
Some days. Maybe. But the point being, anyway, is like I read a lot, So and reading helps you to think a lot, right? And when every book you read, like you're stepping into someone else's life or multiple lifetimes. And it really helps you with, empathy, which is quite a rare concept these days. So like, putting yourself in the position of other people and living through them. And then you start thinking like them, right? So if you're getting deep into a book and you're a little kid and you're like really empathizing with one of the characters, you become that character for a while. So you think like them and you think, well, you apply their thought process to things in your own life and you start doing that, right? And you're living in these fantasy worlds of books. I very much did that. I used to really love those Anna Green Gables books, for example, at one point. And I would really like kind of think of things in those sorts of terms.
Yeah, empathy. Never heard of it.
No. It's cringe. We don't like that shit anymore. Fuck everybody.
No, I'm glad you made that point about books, because just in my own journey, like I was never a reader growing up. I don't think I read a book from cover to cover until I was probably 26, maybe 25.
Wow.
Yeah. and even like school
what was the
stuff.
first book you read then?
The first book I
When
read
you were
was
26?
when I was 26 was Shoe Dog, the book about Phil Knight, the creator of Nike.
Oh, okay.
And that was really good. And I was like, oh, like these books can actually be enjoyable to actually read. And since then, like I've become a voracious reader, and that's pretty much all I do now in my free time. And my personal growth over that time since I've started reading versus like the first 25 years of my life is exponential. And I don't think there's I think it's not mutually exclusive that like that is the reason, because that point of you saying just like one, obviously you're just gaining a lot of knowledge, but you're gaining it in a different way where you have to really sit and like consume it and digest it and think about it in a much more thoughtful way than even watching video, even watching podcasts or listening to podcasts, which I love doing that stuff as well. But reading something for yourself is a much different way to consume information, and to your point of being able to understand what somebody is going through and think about somebody else other than yourself for a little bit, really.
Yeah, it's a book is a holiday from yourself.
Mm.
And you get to, the cool thing about books and comics are the same, is you get to direct them somewhat, as in you get to choose the speed at which you read, right? So you can pause on a bit and you can reread a bit, and you can read fast, or you can slow down your reading, right? So you're partly the director. And actually with books more so than comics, because comics are a visual medium, so they will show, right? They will show you a lot. Whereas with a book, you're going to imagine the whole thing. Like the writer is working with you in your imagination. And the way that I'm going to imagine that, say I'm reading Lord of the Rings, what I imagine based upon what Tolkien has written is going to be different to what you imagine based upon what he's written, right? Because you're working together. And his words are going to be going through the Byzantine conduit that is your specific experience and your way of understanding the world. So you're going to direct a movie based upon his script, essentially. And it's going to come out different, and it's going to be yours. It's going to be personal to you.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the reasons that I didn't read, is because I have this condition, I guess, called aphantasia, where, close your eyes and think of an apple. I don't see anything. I just see
Oh, you got
darkness.
that shit. Yeah.
Yeah. So
My niece
like
got that.
whenever I'm like reading a novel or just something, I can't picture it in my head. And so a lot of my reading now, even to this day, is a lot of just like self-development, nonfiction. I still don't read a lot of novels or fiction. I think kind of for that reason, maybe still, but
Okay, so here's a question. So like you read a book and it says, the guy put an apple on the other guy's head and then shot it off with an arrow. You understand what happened, right? But you just don't see a visual of that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So you can still read a book. It's just you experience it in a different way to someone who thinks in terms of images.
Yeah.
You're aware of what occurred, and you're aware of the concepts and so on and so forth.
Exactly. Yeah. And I like the way I kind of think about it or explain it is like if you, again, tell me to close my eyes and picture my mom, like I can tell you what my mom looks like and I like know, but like I can't actually picture it. And so it is just a different way of thinking and kind of interacting with the world and with yourself. I think that, to your point of just like directing somebody else's words or message, it is for me a much more literal connotation or taking of it than this imaginative idea.
Interesante. How would you feel if you didn't have breakfast this morning?
How would I feel if I didn't have breakfast this morning? At this point, I would probably not be in a great mood because I'm a breakfast guy nowadays.
Okay, so you've got that. That's okay. Sometimes people don't have missing both those things and experience the world in an even different way.
Yeah.
You got the breakfast thing down.
Now they're really struggling. When you first decided on that first, actually, I want to go back to school. You said you dropped out at 16?
Yeah.
What was that reasoning just wasn't doing it for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, school is the little prisons for kids, right? To turn them into
Here we
little
go.
automatons and smash all original creative thought out of them and turn them into just like little gray
Factory
things
workers.
that can exist. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's literally true that the existing school system is the same one that was set up in the 1900s to create factory workers. But and it suits their purposes to consider, even though they don't need factory workers anymore, they still need like malleable little things that have had the fucking will smashed out of them. So obviously I was like, as soon as I could get out of
But
school,
did
I was
you
going to
like
get out
feel
of school.
that at that moment? Like,
I knew that
yeah.
from when I was first put in there. And when I was first put in there, they had to take me out of there. My mum was teaching me at home, like from when I was very little. And then when I went to school, when I was like 5 or something, I was like too advanced because I already knew Shakespeare and shit. So it was like school was super boring. And then like I didn't get on with the other kids for whatever reasons, because I was like all like creative and shit. And they thought that was gay or what have you. So I'd just be in fights every day, but literally just fucking fights every day. Because they would try to bully me and shit, but I would fight back, So I'd just be fucking fighting every day. And it got to one day where literally the whole school was fighting me. It was like me versus the whole school, and like the teachers were watching. It was like some gladiatorial thing.
Yes, sounds like
it
it.
was like the fucking the pitch where they used to play rounders, which is a bit like a Welsh version of baseball. And like I was in the middle fighting the whole school. They'd like waves of them would come at me, bop, bop, so kick. And I look up and the fucking teachers just stood around the side, like
Taking
fucking,
bets on how long you last.
I don't know what the fuck they were like. Kids say shit, So like then I convinced my parents like that I didn't have to go back to school. That was when I was like 7, I think. So then I didn't go to school for a couple of years and just learned at home. But then they sent me back to school, So then I had to suffer school for a while, 5 years or something. But I always knew I would leave. And I always knew, that it was just a case of holding it together for long enough and then I could go out into the world. And I knew that, like, we didn't have the internet then, but I knew I couldn't possibly be the only person who thought and felt like I did. Because I'd read books and there were people in these books, who were not dickheads and were more like me. So nowadays, you could go on the internet, you can find people that were like you and you could talk to them on the internet and you can have internet friends, right? There wasn't the internet when I was a kid, but there was books. So I had my books and I had my music and I had the stuff that I was creating and I held it down and then eventually I was able to leave. And I left school and I left home at the same time. I actually left home first because I still had to finish my exams and shit. And while I was doing my exams, I was sleeping in a tent in the woods and I was hitching into school in the morning, to go and finish school. But I got out of there in the end, And I was correct. I then left school and I left the place, Wales, and I went on adventures and I went around the country, went around the UK, and I found people who were all like me. And
When did you have that first thought of like, I'm going to start dropping out at 16 and start exploring the world and going out on my own? Again, very.
I don't know. I was talking to my wife about this the other day. Like, for whatever reason, I can't really remember anything before like 7, 6. And I'll work that out at some point. But like, I remember one of my first memories is being in this school and they'd wheeled out a TV and they'd put something on the TV to sort of pacify everyone. And I was looking out the window and it was all beautiful and there was this beautiful light coming in. And I had multiple realizations at that point, one of which was the TV itself was evil. And it was the point of this thing. We didn't have one in the house, but we'd had them when I go to see relatives and stuff, So I was like, okay, so this thing is evil, this machine, and it's to pacify people and to stop them thinking and questioning and to just keep them occupied, so for whatever reason. So I was aware of that. And I was aware that the school was evil, also evil and retarded, and was something that I would need to get out of as soon as I could. And I was also aware that outside the window it was beautiful, and that there was a beautiful world out there that I would go and I would have adventures and I would explore, and it was going to be okay. But I knew then, I was like 6 or so, those things. The TV was evil, the system was retarded and evil, but the world was beautiful, and I would be able to, I would escape.
And so what, I don't know, kept you going from 6 to 16? I don't know, did you do good in school, or did you just completely just pass on it?
I did it, and I was clever and shit, and I was good at stuff, but none of the teachers didn't like me because I was, too, I don't know, ask questions and shit like that, so they didn't like that. And even in lessons, like, say, but I learned a lot, right? So I was good at drama. I was good at lots of stuff. I was good at drama, right? I was really good at drama. I was like best in my class. And then when it came time to do the school play, you have a big school play, and like, people, the parents come and see it and shit. I was excited, and they were doing, I thought I would get to play a good role and all this sort of stuff. And then the woman casts it. She was also our English teacher. And she didn't put the best person in the drama class in a lead role. She put the popular kid. And the popular kids from the connected families, who were the local families, who were, local Masons or whatever the fuck type thing, right? The cool, popular, she put them in the lead roles. They were shit at acting. But they got the good parts. I had some fucking tiny little shit part. So I was like, that's how it works. All right. Okay, good. So I know that now too. And I'd read things like that in books as well. But seeing it in real life, you're like, okay. So it's got nothing to do with competence or talent or anything like that. And working hard within the system is pointless. It makes no difference. All right. So you need to create your own thing. So I just spent more time working on my own stories and comic books and music related things, and just sort of, and I enjoyed what I could about classes. I enjoyed the art classes, and I enjoyed reading or the books or what have you in some of the English classes or whatever the fuck it was. But I was very aware from very early what was going on. Yeah.
When you left, where was the first place you went?
Like, you mean geographically or like literally? I think I went to the pub.
Geographically, like whenever you left your hometown.
Pretty sure the first thing I did was go to the pub. That was ridiculous. I was working in pubs from when I was like 15. Geographically, after leaving Wales, I went to the Midlands with the ultimate aim of going to London. But I knew I had family in the Midlands. I went to stay with some family for a few weeks, and then got a job, and then went and got my own apartment. And the Midlands is like Birmingham's the second biggest city. So I went to an overspill town connected to that, and then worked my way to Birmingham itself, and worked in pubs and record shops and things of that nature. But then within a couple of years, I got to London.
And what did you think was there for you in London? Why was that the place you want to go?
Like-minded people, adventure, the fact that I wanted to make music, and that's where the music industry was based. And again, I'd worked out it's not about being very good. I'd read so many interviews with musicians and so many books and stuff. It wasn't about, at that point, the system was you're supposed to like make a demo tape and then get that to someone, they'll listen to it and you'll get a record deal or something, right? You play lots of shows, you get a record deal. But I'd realized, I was like, no, it's who you know, right? It's not what you know, it's who you know. So I had this plan that I would go and get into the music journalism world. And through that way, I would meet people who had positions of power and authority and what have you, gatekeeper types, and I would be able to get in that way. So that's what I did, And I went to London and bullshitted my way into a music magazine job by pretending that I'd had a job at another music magazine, which I hadn't. But I'd written lots in my own fanzine. And by doing my own fanzine and my own comic, which initially was a comic and I'd review music at the back, and then it became like a music magazine with some comics in it. But from that, I became aware of the whole system of the music press and press offices, and you could write to people and phone them and get them to send you records to review and things like that. And you could go to gigs and you'd get a free ticket to go and review and shit like that. And that whole system, I'd worked that whole thing out. So I knew about all that. So I was able to speak with competence and authority and name drop press offices that I knew and things of that nature. So it worked. I was able to get a job in the music press in London, and through that I was able to meet people, and through that I was able to get my own music heard. So it did work. Yeah.
They didn't check references at that time?
Was it?
They didn't check references at that time? Did
You
it call?
couldn't no, like those days. It was the very beginning of the internet. People didn't, it didn't work like it works now. You could give some people some photocopied stuff, and you look at the photocopied stuff. This is before Photoshop. So what people do now with like faking things with Photoshop, you used to do with photocopiers.
Yeah.
So you could put your reviews and things like that next to an NME logo and make it look like you'd written for the NME very easily. And if your shit was good, what's the difference?
Yeah. That's great. Is the music industry better now than it was? Obviously, there's a lot more opportunity to create your own way in the industry with social media and so forth nowadays, but I'm sure there's still a lot of gatekeeping and a lot of
I don't
hoops
have
that.
anything to do with the music industry.
Okay.
There's all those things that I learned at school, like with the school play thing and all that. That applies to everything, right? It certainly applies to the music industry. I have nothing to do with the music industry now at all. I used to, and it's funny, I used to in like certain magazines and things used to review all my music and interview me and write about things in that traditional music industry fashion. The second I put out that Jordan Peterson record, that is like, it shut off a lot of doors, which I knew it would. My thing was always, you need to build your own industry. That's like from that first thing with that play, like, oh, you can't be in any situation where you're relying on someone to cast you in the play or to accept your book or whatever it is, right? Because it's not going to happen without you somehow compromising yourself or whatever the fuck it is, or having to know the right people or whatever it was, right? You need to be able to make your own world. You need to create your own world and create your own industry. And I knew that from very early. And I knew that, and I wrote a big article about that, like the week before I signed my first major record deal, before that happened. And I'd written this whole article about how, and this was in 2003, 2004. I'd written about how you don't need record labels anymore, and a record deal is just a bank loan with a lot of advisors. They're going to tell you how you have to spend your money, and you don't need that anymore because there's the internet and da-da-da-da-da. And then through a series of circumstances that I engineered, I ended up getting offered a record deal at Interscope Records, which was the biggest rap label at the time. And I thought, well, I know this is bad and stupid and it's going to, but I should try. It'll be fun. Why not? You'll never know. So I did. And then everything that I'd written came true, as always happens. We become what we think about. But I knew from a position of authority that's what would happen, because that's what happened. And then I spent the rest of till these days making it so that I never had to rely on that system anymore, and created my own world, my own systems of distribution and promotion and all of these sorts of things. And I now exist completely separate to that whole industry, and I'm doing very well, and certainly a lot better than a lot of the people that they try and push, and B, so many people who I've seen come and go and rise and fall over the years.
And I think something for you specifically is that what you do is so unique that in this future of music where AI is going to be creating 1,000 new songs a minute.
Already is.
Already is?
Yeah, it's already happening. 200,000 a day being uploaded to Spotify.
200,000
a month ago. It was 130,000 at the beginning of the year. Today, I'm sure it will be much higher. So it's already happening.
Crazy. So yeah, in a market that is already as much just noise as there is, find somebody that is actually signal within that is going to be ever increasingly difficult. And so to create something for yourself, like you have, or you haven't had to answer anybody, you're able to do whatever you want, create whatever you want. It is creating this kind of bubble that you're in where you don't play within the same forces as a normal artist or somebody else that is trapped in the machine.
It's very important now, more than ever. And it was always the case, but now more than ever, to be as pure and uncompromised an expression of you as possible, right? Right. I talk about that. I mentioned earlier that Byzantine conduit. You are the Byzantine conduit, right? Every experience you've had, every thought you've had, every adventure you've had, everything you've loved, everything you've loathed, all of those things that combine to be you, right? And then what you create goes through that. And what emerges if it goes through that, unfiltered, untouched, unmolested, uncompromised, will be a pure expression that could only have come through you, that could not come from anywhere else, right? AI can't replicate that. AI can copy the expression, but it can't predict the next one. And if you keep working like that, and what you do, whatever you do, if whatever you do is a pure expression of you that is coming through that Byzantine conduit that is you, that's something that only you can do. And you will have a place in the world, and an ever more valuable place in the world. If what you do is copying some other people, AI can do that better, right? If what you do is a compromised version of you, because you're scared, right? So what comes out is you mixed with what you think other people want. AI can do that, right? What AI can't do is true you. And you that keeps moving, it keeps stepping forward and doesn't stop and get scared and confused. It can only copy, it can't create. It can't truly create, right? So that's what everyone needs to be doing, and it will be wonderful. Because if everybody's doing that, imagine the glory of that world, right? Where everyone is operating at 100% pure them. As truly great as possible. You only have greatness. Mid goes. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think it's no coincidence that mid has become slang over the past few years, right? And widely used slang. Mid means bad now. Mid, just the word mid, meaning middling, average, middle of the road. That's now actually the worst thing that you could be. If a record comes out and it's mid, there's mid, right? Mid is bad because mid is what AI can copy. AI creates mid. That's what AI can do. AI can create, it can pump out mid forever. And if mid is okay for you, then you'll be satisfied, right? So all these movies that have come out and the past 10, 15 years of movies where everything's just been sort of boiled down to this lowest common denominator thing that can get through. I remember saying years ago that there is no way that a Marvel movie could ever be better than a 7. At the peak of Marvel, when people were like, this is great, I was like, the best is a high 6.8, 7. Because it couldn't be any better, because something better wouldn't get through the focus groups. Godfather is not going to get through a focus group, right? Greatness doesn't get through a focus group because there's too many mid people of middling intelligence and experience who just wouldn't understand it, and they get angry about shit like that. They get angry about greatness, right? So it has to be mid. So movies became mid, and music became mid. There's no truly great Taylor Swift record. There's a mid Taylor Swift record. True greatness isn't allowed to exist in that system, right? So you just end up with mid. And then what happens is AI is unleashed. AI can create all the mid in the world. You're all the mid in the world. So if what you're focused on is creating mid, you're fucked. You are out of a job. You're not useful anymore, right? Because robots can do mid. So you need to be doing greatness. And greatness comes as a pure expression of you in an uncompromised fashion. That's where greatness comes from. Working in harmony with the divine. So
how does somebody get in touch with that uncompromised version of themselves that is truly them? As we talked a little bit before, we all have programming from society, from our childhood, from people, from teachers, that knowing what is truly us can be difficult.
Yeah, you're
so
right.
How does someone go about doing that?
Well, that goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, right? So distancing, working out what is you, what is the you that is awareness, and what is coming from somewhere else, right? So is that me, or is that something my mum said when I was 7? Is that me, or was that on Twitter and I read it last week and now it's come back up again and I'm thinking it's my thought, right? So you work on that, on being you, being awareness, the awareness that is you, and the more you do that, the more you're able to tune into what is you and what is not you, and to separate those things. And then, therefore, when you're creating the choices you make, because when you're just making choices, right? Are they your choices or someone else's choices? And so you work on it becoming more and more your choices, and less other people's choices. And the more you do that, it's a muscle, and it becomes stronger and stronger, and it gains momentum. And the deeper into that you go, the more an expression of you rather than someone else it is, and you keep going and you keep going and you keep going, and eventually you'll get to a place where what is coming out of you in your just everyday speech and what you create and how you operate in the world is a truer expression of you than ever it was before. You keep doing that, and then one day you die. Yeah.
No, that's beautifully said. And how I like to think about it a little bit is the more you disagree with the majority of the population and what you're doing or what you believe, or just the less that is common, the less that is frequent, the more it is you, because you are an individual, and of course you're
It's the bell
included.
curve thing. It's that bell curve thing again. You
Back
know what I
to
mean?
it
It's
all.
like
It all comes back to
retard
the
guy on
midwood
the
meme.
right, like vaccine bad, like yeah, like it's
It
very
all
much that.
comes
I have
back.
this series of things that I do on social media where I observe something obviously evil and upside down. Today's one was there was an article that came out in the Daily Mail saying that processed food is actually good for you. So I say the devil speaks in inversion, and once you learn to recognize the voice of the devil, life is on easy mode. And you see this everywhere, right? And it's very easy. And this is very, like, if you think of things in that term, the devil speaks in inversion. It's always the truth upside down. They always invert. It's always inverted. And once you notice that, it's very easy. You go, okay, so that person or that kind of creature or entity says this. So just do the opposite. And you'll fucking 99% of the time, more than that, you'll be great. You'll win. Which is basically what you were, an aspect of what you were saying. If you find yourself in disagreement with the crowd, then you're probably correct.
It all comes back to the midwood meme. Always does.
Just to conclude, that works in regards to what we were just talking about. So it's learning to recognize the voice of God and the voice of the devil and the voice of yourself, right? And you and the voice of God are entwined. Are you just learning to recognize these voices? Learn to recognize the voice of the devil, right? And that will help you with A, your decision making, B, your becoming the truest version of yourself possible, becoming that pure, unfiltered, epic, glorious you, operating on 100% glorious, effervescent, shining magnificence that is the purpose of your being, right? One of the ways to get there is to recognize the voice of the devil and not pay attention to that motherfucker, and actually just do the opposite of what he says, and then you'll be doing great.
I was going to actually ask about that tweet because you do tweet it out a good bit. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of it out there.
And it's just one of these things. Once you notice it, it's just everywhere, and you see it all the fucking time. That becomes funny. And people, I'd be trying. It's something I've been trying to explain to people for decades, and it's difficult to explain. And I've found that this, in a mimetic fashion, is a good way of explaining it. And I get people writing to me saying, "Oh, okay, I get what you mean now." It's like I didn't understand for the first 3 or 4, but now I get it, and now I see it everywhere. So.
Then again, but like, how does someone start to recognize that voice of the devil versus the voice of God?
Yeah, well, you recognize that the devil speaks in inversion, like literal upside down. So you spot that, you see that, and then you pay attention, and you start seeing it in other places, and more places, and you start to recognize the patterns, and then you start hearing it coming out of certain voices or stories or characters or personalities or what have you, and you just start to recognize the voice of the devil. You can see it, you can hear it. And then it becomes very easy to navigate. But it's literally, like with anything, it's just a case of paying attention and taking note of things and noticing these patterns and not just going, oh, I must be crazy, or things like that don't exist, or paying attention. I remember Grant Morrison saying years ago, the first step, here's one, because one of the things I use a lot in life is I pay attention to synchronicity. And I've come to find that synchronicity, just like Malcolm X said, that means that you're on the path. And the closer to the path you are, the more synchronicities there will be. And if you start drifting from the path, synchronicities will decrease. And so the first step to being able to utilize that as a system and as a heuristic is to pay attention and to synchronicities when they pop up, and don't just like, oh yeah. And the more you pay attention, the more you will see, right? And the more you can use that as a navigational system. And so that's with everything. One of the main things is pay attention, right? Pay attention, observe, remember, keep records. Don't just brush things off as, oh, no, crazy. Yeah, no, crazy. Like, that's how they get you, you know?
Absolutely. Paying attention. Easiest thing, but also at the same time, the hardest thing.
Pay attention and think things all the way through to their natural conclusion. Again, I keep going back to these things. Unnecessary suffering. There's all this unnecessary suffering, and it breaks my heart because so much of it could just so very quickly and easily be removed. Exist in the moment as much as possible. That's another thing that, the more you do, the more you can do, and the easier it is to get there, right? Not thinking things through to their logical conclusion. Not just chess. Just this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. People make these decisions based upon how it will make them feel in the immediate moment, and don't go what it will do to them tomorrow, right? Just simple shit. I'm going to eat this cake because I want to feel good now. Then fast forward, you're a fucking obese thing that can't drag your own ass up a pair of steps, and you're in constant fucking agony and sorrow, right? If you just fucking thought forward a little bit, you wouldn't have done that stupid thing. This is the same with, concepts, socialism, fucking communism, whatever the fuck it is, right? You think these things through a bit, you go, oh, fuck yeah, that will happen. That will always happen. Oh, yeah, so just don't do that, right? So much of unnecessary suffering is just a simple result of people not thinking things through very far. Even a couple of fucking steps,
Yeah. With 100% agree on that. And I also think it's a great place to end. Akira, I really appreciate you coming on. This was as good as I imagined it was going to be. And so I finished with the same question that I ask all guests, and it is, what is your why? Why do you do what you do?
Well, as in, he who has a why can withstand any how. Yeah. I've never thought about it. I'm aware of that whole idea, and I've never actually sat down and thought that all the way through. What is the why? What is the pure, distilled, one word why of being? So I guess I have to think about it more, because I wouldn't want to give you the wrong, half-cocked answer.
Fair.
It's similar to the whole what is meaning idea, and this is a personal thing that you have to find for yourself, right? What is the meaning of life? My son said, well, I was talking to this with my son. He said, well, obviously it's to live. He said, obviously that's not a difficult question. I said, yeah, you're right. That is the meaning of life. Now, what meaning you find within it, then that becomes what you do, and what you go through life and you find the reasons for being. And these are personal things, and what makes you want to be here and want to go on. What you were asking earlier, what made you suffer through school or what have you? Because I knew there was something better. I knew there was something beautiful. And I knew there were people who thought like me. And I knew it didn't have to be like this forever. And that's the case now, and you see these little glittering intonations of the true, what really could be. And you see them all around you. And you move towards that, and you work towards that. And you want to bring more and more and more of that into your life, so that becomes your experience. Because it could be, right? And that's heaven. And heaven exists. And we can have that here now. And we can all have that here now. And it comes down to making the right decision with everything you're offered, right? You get to make choices all day long. Little things. Do I smile at that lady? Do I get grumpy about this thing that just happened? Do I allow this anger to consume me at this moment and make this person's life worse through my immediate reaction? Or do I distance myself and allow it to wash by? And we do this every day, all these little moments. And we get to choose how close to the potential, glittering glory that exists for us we get, you know? So maybe that's why. Because
I love that.
there's something indescribably beautiful in the potential of your being that you could have if you made the right decisions. And there's also the opposite. And it's truly up to you.
I got nothing to add to that. Akira, appreciate it again. If people want to find out more about you, listen to the new album, where is the best place for them to just get in touch and check out everything that you got going on?
Meaningwave.com, because happiness is a side effect of meaning.
Meaningwave.com. We'll have that linked in the show notes. We'll also have your Twitter linked, YouTube, all that stuff in the show notes as well, so people can check out everything that you got going on. But again, Akira, this is great. I appreciate you, man. And thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate you, brother.